The only life Ilara couldn't save was the one that mattered most, and its ghost lived in the marrow of her bones, a constant, chilling reminder of her failure. Every soul she mended since was a penance, an offering to a past that would never forgive her. In the village of Oakhaven, nestled against the ancient woods of Silverwood, her name was a curse, whispered in the same breath as a plea for help. They feared her hands, the strange, untamed energy that flowed from them. Yet they crawled to her doorstep in the dead of night when fever raged or wounds festered. She was their secret shame and their last resort. This crushing loneliness was the price she paid for her gift. A self-imposed exile where the quiet rustle of leaves was her only true companion, and the hope of belonging was a dream she had long since buried. Comenta de dónde nos ves y suscríbete, porque esta historia apenas comienza. Ahora sí, continuemos. Her small cottage was a testament to this fractured existence, built just beyond the last fence post of the village, teetering between the world of men and the wild heart of the forest. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried herbs, yarrow for staunching blood, willowbark for pain, and moonpetal for sleep, a fragrant armor against the world's judgment. Her days followed a quiet rhythm dictated by the sun and the needs of the forest's creatures. Her only patients who did not flinch from her touch, she had convinced herself this was enough, that this solitude was a form of peace. But in the deep quiet of the night, a secret desire ached within her, to find a place where her healing was not seen as a dark omen, but as the blessing she so desperately wished it could be. Silverwood was her true sanctuary. Unlike the villagers, the ancient trees did not judge. Their gnarled roots were a history of resilience, their towering canopies a promise of shelter. Here, she was not a pariah, she was part of a living, breathing world that understood the cycles of life, death, and renewal. She knew the secret paths woven by deer, the hollows where owls nested, and the sun-dappled clearings where the rarest medicinal flowers bloomed. The forest's magic, a subtle and ancient power, seemed to hum in harmony with her own, a gentle resonance that soothed the frayed edges of her soul. It was a connection far deeper and more honest than any she had ever shared with another person, a silent understanding that made the rejection from her own kind almost bearable. This forest was the only home her heart had ever truly known. The first sign of wrongness was not a sight, but a scent. It wasn't the clean, earthy smell of a natural wildfire, but a foul, acrid stench of something ancient and malevolent being unmade, carried on a wind that suddenly felt unnaturally hot against her skin. A tremor ran through the ground, a low, guttural vibration that sent birds screeching from the treetops in a panicked exodus. Looking west, toward the heart of Silverwood, she saw the sky was no longer a gentle twilight blue, but a pulsating, sickening orange, shot through with veins of violent violet. The roar that followed was not the crackle of burning wood, but a shriek, as if the very soul of the forest was being torn apart by a power that had no place in the natural world. This was no accident. It was an execution. Panic seized the village, doors slamming shut, and prayers being cried out to gods who had long forgotten them. But while they ran from the horror, Ilara found her feet frozen, her gaze locked on the wall of emerald and purple flame, consuming her only refuge. The healer's instinct, the same desperate, foolish drive that had led to her greatest failure, rose like a tide within her. It screamed at her that there was life in that inferno, life that was suffering, life that needed her. The memory of the one she lost warred with the cries of the many she could potentially save. With a choked sob that was both a prayer and a curse, she ignored the shouts from the village and ran, not away from the cataclysm, but directly into its blazing, tormented heart. The ghost that haunted Ilara had a name, Liam. He was her younger brother, a boy with laughter like wind chimes and eyes that held the wild, untamed magic of the forest. It had manifested in him not as a gentle gift, but as a consuming fever, a fire in his blood. She had tried to heal him, pouring her own raw energy into his small frame, believing her love could temper the storm. Instead, it had been like pouring oil on a fire. The power she wielded, a force she barely understood, had amplified the chaos within him until it tore him apart from the inside. The memory was a brand on her soul, the scent of ozone, the shattering silence after his last scream, and the look of horror and accusation in her parents' eyes. It was the moment her gift became her curse, and her home became a place of judgment. The rejection was swift and absolute. Whispers turned to shouts, and grief-stricken glares turned to stones cast in her direction. They called her a monster, a witch who had sacrificed her own blood for some dark power. Her parents, hollowed out by their loss, could no longer look at her without seeing their son's ghost. They didn't force her out, they simply erased her, their silence a wall more impenetrable than any locked door. So she left, carrying nothing but the weight of her failure and the clothes on her back. She built her cottage at the edge of the world she knew, a physical manifestation of her exile. The village's fear was a constant, suffocating presence, a poison she breathed every day, reinforcing the belief that she was unworthy of love, family, or forgiveness. This is a journey of deep emotional scars, a theme we explore often in our community. This profound wound festered in the deepest part of her, poisoning any thought of a future that included companionship or love. How could she ever allow someone close enough to touch her soul when she believed it was tainted? Romance was a fairy tale for other people, for those with clean hands and clear consciences. For her, intimacy was a terrifying risk, a potential death sentence for anyone foolish enough to care for her. She imagined her touch would bring only ruin, her affection a harbinger of doom. She had built her walls so high and so thick that even she had forgotten what it felt like to wish for a hand to hold. Her desire for belonging was buried so deep beneath layers of guilt and self-loathing that it had become a fossilized ache, a pain she no longer recognized as hope. Her days became a careful, structured ritual of loneliness. She rose with the sun, tended her herb garden, and walked the forest paths, her senses attuned to the quiet suffering of the wild. She would set a fox's broken leg, soothe a feverish fawn, or cleanse an infected wound on a wolf, her touch gentle and sure. These creatures never flinched from her. They saw her gift for what it was, a source of relief, not a threat. This was the only validation she received, the only proof that she was not entirely a monster. But the nights were a different story. In the suffocating silence of her cottage, the loneliness would creep in, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered her. She would stare into the fire, the ache for a shared glance, a simple conversation, a moment of human connection so sharp it felt like a physical blade twisting in her gut. It was this desperate need for atonement that drove her into the inferno of Silverwood. Every elf she dragged from the flames was a desperate prayer, a frantic bargain with a past that would not listen. She pushed her body past its limits, the heat searing her skin, the smoke clawing at her lungs. But the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the agony in her soul. She wasn't saving them out of pure altruism. She was trying to save herself. With each life she preserved, she hoped to scrub a tiny fraction of the stain left by Liam's death. She didn't care if she died in the process. In fact, a small, dark part of her welcomed the thought. To die in the act of saving another would be the only noble end she could imagine for a life defined by such a catastrophic failure. She awoke to the muted grey light of dawn, not in her cottage, but on a cot in a large, makeshift tent. The air smelled of burnt earth, antiseptic herbs, and the lingering scent of ozone. All around her lay the wounded elves she had pulled from the fire, their silver hair matted with ash, their proud features etched with pain. A profound sense of sorrow washed over her as she took in the scale of the devastation. She had saved so many, yet so much had been lost. Her body ached with an exhaustion so deep it felt as if it had settled in her bones, a weariness that went far beyond the physical. In this channel, I bring you the most epic and intense love stories. Every week, a new world, a new impossible passion, before she could fully process her surroundings. The canvas flap of the tent was thrown aside, casting two long, imposing shadows over her. Two elven guards, clad in gleaming armor of silver and obsidian, stood in the entrance. Their faces were carved from stone, their eyes holding no warmth, no gratitude, only an unnerving, dispassionate authority. They did not speak to the other elves. Their gaze was fixed solely on her. One of them stepped forward, his voice a low, commanding rumble that allowed for no argument. "The human healer, Elara," he stated, not as a question but as a pronouncement. "By order of the regent, you are to come with us, immediately." There was no explanation, no room for refusal. It was a summons, a command that pulled her from the ashes of one life and thrust her, terrified and bewildered, toward the heart of another. The journey from the medical tent was a silent, unnerving procession. Flanked by the two obsidian-clad guards, Elara was led through the heart of the Elven encampment. It was a place of stark contrasts. Ancient tapestries depicting scenes of starlit hunts were draped over scorched earth, and the delicate, melodic chimes of elven instruments were punctuated by the ragged coughs of the wounded. Every silver-haired elf they passed stopped to stare, their gazes a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and thinly veiled contempt. She was a foreign body here, a human stain on their pristine, grieving world. With every step, the fear that had been a dull ache in her chest sharpened into a blade of pure terror. They weren't taking her to be thanked. They were taking her to be judged, to be punished for her audacity, for touching what was sacred and theirs alone. They arrived at a pavilion that seemed woven from living silverwood branches and moonlight, an oasis of impossible beauty amidst the devastation. It stood apart from the other tents, guarded by sentinels whose armor seemed to drink the light. The air around it hummed with a palpable energy, an ancient and formidable power that made the hair on Elara's arms stand on end. One of her escorts announced their arrival with a single, resonant word spoken in the Elven tongue. The pavilion's silk flap was drawn back from within, revealing an interior bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. She was nudged forward, stumbling into a space that felt more like a throne room than a temporary shelter. The scent of old parchment, ozone, and a faint metallic tang of blood filled her senses, and she felt the crushing weight of centuries of history settle upon her shoulders. He stood with his back to her, a silhouette against a large, intricately detailed map of the forest. King Kaelan was taller than she had imagined, with a warrior's build that even the fine silk of his tunic could not conceal. His silver hair, now clean, fell like a cascade of molten moonlight to his shoulders. As he turned, she saw the face she had only glimpsed through smoke and pain. It was a masterpiece of harsh, aristocratic beauty, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed winter sky. A fresh bandage was wrapped around his forearm, but the true wound was not visible. It was in the rigid set of his shoulders, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he clenched it into a fist, and a fleeting darkness that swirled deep within his gaze, a shadow that his regal composure could not entirely hide. His eyes swept over her, not with gratitude, but with a cold, piercing assessment that stripped her bare, weighing her worth in a single, unnerving glance. "You are the human," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that held no warmth, only the chilling authority of command. "You pulled 30 of my people from the flames, and you pulled me." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was taut with tension. This fire was not an act of nature. It was an assault, a calculated strike by those who wished to see my throne usurped. They sought to sever my connection to this land, to poison the very source of our strength. My council is a nest of vipers, and my kingdom balances on a knife's edge. Your intervention has complicated matters." His words were like chips of ice, each one making it clear she was not a savior, but a problem. He took a step closer, and the air crackled with his barely contained power. Elara could feel it now, a wild, chaotic energy pulsing just beneath his skin, a storm raging behind the dam of his control. The blight that scorched Silverwood did not stop with the trees, he confessed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It has taken root in me. It is a dark magic, a poison that seeks to unravel my own. It feeds on my connection to the land, twisting it into something destructive." For a split second, the mask of infallible rule slipped, and she saw a flicker of raw desperation in his eyes, a terrifying vulnerability of a man chained to a power that was actively trying to consume him from within. He was not just a wounded king, he was a walking cataclysm, a vessel for the very destruction that had ravaged his home. This was why she was here. It wasn't about gratitude or punishment for trespassing, it was about necessity. His necessity. "Our healers' methods are too gentle for this corruption," Kalen stated, his gaze locking onto hers, intense and unyielding. "Their magic seeks to soothe, to mend. This blight must be torn out. What you possess is different. It is raw, untamed, human. It is a fire to fight fire." He stood before her, a king on the brink, his kingdom's fate and his own sanity hanging by a thread that he now intended to place in her hands. He didn't ask for her help. He didn't offer a reward. His expression hardened into a decree of absolute authority. "You saved my life, healer. Now you will save my reign. You will do exactly as I command, and your new life begins now." His words hung in the air, cold and absolute, a declaration that irrevocably shattered the quiet misery of her existence. Elara stood, frozen, the warmth from the braziers doing nothing to thaw the ice forming in her veins. Her mind, still clouded with the exhaustion of battle and the shock of her surroundings, struggled to process the sheer audacity of his command. She wasn't a subject to be ordered. She was a pariah who had stumbled into a world not meant for her. A spark of her old, weary defiance flickered within her. Who was this king, saved from the brink of death by her own hands, to now claim ownership of her life? She raised her chin, her gaze meeting his across the expanse of silk and shadow. For the first time, she saw past the regal beauty to the raw, predatory power coiled beneath, and she understood that this was not a negotiation, it was a claiming. Kalen seemed to sense the resistance brewing within her, and his expression hardened, erasing any trace of the vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier. He turned from her, striding with a fluid grace to the large map stretched across a table of polished obsidian. "My kingdom is bleeding," he stated, his voice a low growl that resonated with the hum of the pavilion's magic. His finger, elegant and unyielding, traced a jagged line along the western border of Silverwood. The House of Whispering Thorns, led by my uncle, Lord Malachor, orchestrated the attack. They believe the blight has weakened me, severed my connection to the land. They see a wounded animal, and the vipers on my own council are ready to help them strike the killing blow. To survive, I cannot simply show strength. I must present an impossibility, a miracle that will shatter their ambitions and rally my loyalists, a new source of power, a new queen. He turned back to face her, his storm-grey eyes pinning her in place. The air grew thick, heavy with an unspoken power that made it difficult to breathe. "That is where you come in, human." The word was not an insult, but a statement of fact. A label that defined her otherness, her uniqueness in this equation. Your raw, chaotic magic is a phenomenon none of them can explain. An unknown quantity is a weapon. Therefore, to secure my throne and give me the time I need to purge the poison from my veins, you will bind yourself to me in the most public and unbreakable way possible." He let the silence stretch, his gaze unwavering, before delivering the final, devastating blow. "Elara of Oakhaven, you will marry me. You will sit on the elven throne at my side, and you will become my queen before the next full moon." The world tilted on its axis. The words were so preposterous, so utterly insane, that for a moment Elara thought she was hallucinating. A fever dream brought on by smoke and exhaustion. Marry him, the formidable, aloof elven king, a being of ancient power and timeless grace, proposing a union with a human outcast, a woman whose own people threw stones at her. Laughter, hysterical and sharp, threatened to bubble up from her throat, but it died under the crushing weight of his stare. This was not a jest, this was a strategic maneuver, and she was the key piece on the board. Her mind flashed back to her hovel, to the lonely nights and fearful days, to the crushing weight of being utterly and completely alone. He was offering her an escape, but it looked just like another, far more beautiful and dangerous, cage. "You will want for nothing," Kalen continued, his voice softening into a persuasive, almost hypnotic cadence as he saw the conflict warring in her eyes. He was closing the trap, using her own deepest wounds as bait. "You will be adorned in silks and jewels, waited on by servants, and you will live in a palace carved from starlight and living wood. The name Elara will no longer be a curse whispered in the shadows. It will be a title spoken with reverence and fear. The villagers who cast you out will bow before you. You will have a home, a place in this world more secure than any you could have ever dreamed of. I am offering you the one thing you have never had, belonging. All you have to do is accept it." His words were a siren's song, promising a shore of acceptance to a woman who had been drowning in isolation for her entire life. Then the silken glove of his offer was removed, revealing the iron fist beneath. "Your role will be a performance," he clarified, his tone shifting back to one of cold command. "In public, you will be my adoring wife. You will smile, you will defer, and you will look upon me as if I am your entire world. Your healing abilities will be presented as a rare, heaven-sent gift, a blessing upon our union. But the truth of this arrangement, that it is a political necessity, a contract of survival, must remain a secret locked within these walls. If you ever betray this confidence, if you ever reveal the nature of our pact to a single soul, your life will be forfeit. Do not mistake my desperation for weakness, healer. I will protect my kingdom, and I will eliminate any threat to it, even if that threat is my own queen." A profound silence descended upon the pavilion, broken only by the crackle of the braziers. Elara looked at the magnificent, tormented king before her, a man willing to shackle himself to a human pariah to save his people. In his chilling proposal, she saw a mirror of her own desperation. He was trapped by his crown, his power, his enemies. She was trapped by her past, her gift, her loneliness. They were two sides of the same cursed coin, each seeking a salvation the other might hold. In that shared abyss, she found an unexpected foothold. He needed her not just for her power, but for the lie she could help him build. She was not merely a pawn to be moved. She was an essential, active participant in his survival. This realization did not banish her fear, but it tempered it with a sliver of control. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice a low, steady thing that did not tremble. "I accept," she said, the words feeling alien on her tongue, sealing her fate with two simple syllables. Kalen's stoic expression betrayed a flicker of relief, a minute relaxation of the tension in his shoulders. He had won. But Elara was not finished. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them until she could feel the dangerous heat of his power against her skin. "I will be your queen. I will be your lie. But this will not be a master and servant arrangement." She met his stormy gaze without flinching. "I have one condition. If I am to be your shield, if my life is to be the price of this secret, then you will grant me something in return, something that is not a jewel or a title, but a promise." Her unexpected ultimatum hung in the charged air, a challenge to the king who believed he held all the power. Kaelin's stormy eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic features at her audacity. He had expected tears or trembling gratitude, not a demand. The silence in the pavilion stretched, thick with the scent of ozone and the weight of his unspoken power. He studied her, this human healer with ash in her hair and defiance in her eyes, a creature of dirt and determination who dared to bargain with a king. He saw not weakness, but a core of tempered steel forged in a fire he could only imagine. This unexpected strength, he realized, was precisely what he needed. It was a quality that could survive his court. "State your condition," he commanded, his voice a low rumble, a concession that was also a challenge. "You will heal not only me," Elara said, her voice steady, "but any of my people from Oakhaven who seek my aid. They will be granted safe passage and treated with respect within your lands. They fear me, but they still need me. I will not abandon them to be your queen." The ceremony was not one of pomp or celebration, but of ancient, binding magic. Kaelin led her to the heart of the scorched forest, to a single, colossal silverwood tree that had miraculously survived the inferno, its leaves glowing with a faint, ethereal light. Under the watchful eyes of his two most loyal guards, he took her hands. They were not joined by rings of gold, but by a vow spoken in the old tongue, words that resonated in the very marrow of Elara's bones. As he spoke, a luminous silver thread of light spun from his heart and wrapped around their joined hands, sinking into their skin and leaving a faint, shimmering mark. It was a bond that could not be broken, a tether of magic and fate that sealed their lie into an unbreakable truth. The air grew still, the magic settling around them like a shroud, and Elara knew there was no turning back from this path. Or like if you're hooked, and subscribe for more epic romances. The announcement was a thunderclap that shattered the fragile peace of the Elven court. Kaelin summoned his council to the command pavilion, a grim assembly of suspicious nobles and wary generals. With Elara standing at his side, her hand held firmly in his, he made his proclamation. His voice, imbued with regal power, left no room for debate. "Behold, Elara of Silverwood, my savior and my queen," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces before him. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled elves. Whispers erupted like wildfire, a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and calculated speculation. Lord Malachor, his uncle and chief rival, watched from the shadows, his handsome face a mask of polite curiosity that did not quite conceal the venomous ambition swirling in his dark eyes. The king had not just taken a wife, he had chosen a human, an act so unprecedented it was either a sign of madness or a stroke of strategic genius. Among the most visibly disturbed was General Theron, Kaelin's oldest friend and the commander of his armies. A warrior whose loyalty was etched into the scars on his face. Theron stared at Elara, not as a queen, but as a contamination. He saw her human frailty, her unknown origins, as a critical vulnerability in their defenses. To him, this marriage was a desperate, foolish gamble that cheapened the throne and distracted his king from the real threat of civil war. His jaw was tight, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword in a gesture that was both protective of Kaelin and deeply hostile toward her. He offered a stiff, formal bow, but his eyes, cold as glacial ice, promised a scrutiny that would be relentless. Elara felt his distrust like a physical blow, a stark reminder that earning the respect of this court would be a battle far more difficult than surviving a magical fire. The news spread through the encampment like a shockwave, carried on the wind with the scent of ash and healing herbs. For the elves she had pulled from the flames, their families, and the wounded she now tended to, the announcement was a miracle. They saw her as a blessing from the heavens, a symbol of hope in a time of despair. Her human hands were not a mark of inferiority, but proof of a unique and potent magic that had saved their king and their loved ones. But for many others, steeped in centuries of elven pride and purity, the idea of a human queen was an abomination. They whispered that the fire had addled the king's mind, that he had been bewitched by a human sorceress. Elara was now a figure of both reverence and revulsion, a living schism in a kingdom already tearing itself apart at the seams. To solidify their union, Kaelin insisted they walk through the main thoroughfare of the encampment. It was a calculated display of unity, a silent declaration of his unwavering choice. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs as they stepped out into the pale afternoon light. The stares were immediate and intense, 1,000 pairs of ancient, almond-shaped eyes dissecting her every move. She felt small, breakable, an imposter in a world of impossible grace. Sensing her terror, Kaelin's hand found the small of her back, a firm, grounding pressure. It was not a gesture of affection, but of command, a silent order to keep her head high. The warmth of his touch was a startling brand against the thin fabric of her dress, a stark contrast to the cold hostility radiating from the crowd. He was her shield, but he was also her cage, and she was trapped in the gilded space between. As they passed a group of stern-faced elven traditionalists, a voice, sharp and laced with contempt, cut through the tense silence. "Human filth!" A male elf spat, his face twisted in a sneer of disgust. "She pollutes the sacred throne." Before the royal guard could react, a small, hard stone, likely a piece of scorched earth, flew from the crowd and struck Ilara's temple. The impact was sharp, a stinging shock that made her flinch and cry out. A small gasp of pain and surprise. The crowd fell silent, a collective intake of breath at the sheer audacity of the assault. Humiliation, hot and swift, washed over Ilara. She had been an outcast in her own village, pelted with stones of fear. To find the same hatred here, in her new life as a queen, was a soul-crushing blow, a confirmation that no title could ever erase what she was. Kaelin did not move toward the attacker. He simply stopped, his hand never leaving her back, and turned his head. The air around them dropped 20 degrees. A palpable wave of raw, untamed power rolled off him, a pressure so immense that elves hundreds of feet away fell to their knees. The sky above seemed to darken as his storm-grey eyes locked onto the offender, a gaze that promised not swift punishment, but a slow, agonizing oblivion. "The Queen's blood has been spilled on elven soil." His voice was a low, terrifying whisper that carried to every corner of the encampment. The next hand, raised against her will, be the last thing its owner ever sees. The threat was absolute. He then turned his focus back to Ilara, his expression unreadable, but the protective fury that emanated from him was a tangible shield, wrapping around her and silencing the entire world. He guided her away from the stunned crowd and into the silken confines of their appointed pavilion without another word. Once inside, the flap drawn shut, the sounds of the camp faded into a muted hum. The performance was over. Ilara's hand flew to her temple, her fingers coming away with a smear of blood. She was trembling, not from the pain of the cut, but from the terrifying, exhilarating display of Kaelin's power. He had defended her, not just his political asset, but her. She had expected him to be angry at the complication, at the weakness her presence had invited. But the fury she had witnessed was not cold calculation. It was personal, a primal rage that had momentarily eclipsed the aloof king. He turned to her then, the storm in his eyes now a quiet, swirling mist, and the vast space of the royal tent suddenly felt impossibly small. Without speaking, he crossed the distance between them. He gently took her hand, pulling it away from the wound, his touch surprisingly soft for a warrior king. His long, elegant fingers tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. With his other hand, he retrieved a clean silk cloth and carefully dabbed at the blood, his movements precise and focused. "They will learn," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to travel directly from his chest to hers. "I will not allow them to harm you." His thumb brushed against her cheek, a ghost of a touch just below her eye. A gesture of comfort so profoundly intimate, it shattered the cold terms of their contract. A jolt, hot and electric, passed between them, and in that charged silence, they both understood that the greatest danger wasn't the vipers in the court, but the uncontrollable truth sparking to life right here, in the space between a king and his lie. The days that followed bled into a strange and stilted routine, a delicate dance of pretense performed within the cold, opulent halls of the Elven palace. Ilara found herself adrift in a sea of silent servants and shimmering marble, the weight of her borrowed silks a constant, suffocating reminder of her fraudulent position. She spent hours in the royal library, a cavernous space that smelled of ancient parchment and starlight, seeking refuge from the judging eyes of the court. Kaelin would often find her there, not speaking, but simply taking a seat across the vast obsidian table, his stormy gaze fixed on a scroll. The silence between them was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and the dangerous, magnetic pull of their forced proximity. They were two solitary islands, suddenly bound by a fragile, invisible bridge, and neither knew how to cross it. Kaelin, in a rare moment of unguardedness, found her struggling to decipher a passage in a tome of Elven history. He moved with a silent grace that still unnerved her, his shadow falling over the page. Instead of dismissing her, he leaned closer, the clean, sharp scent of winter air and ozone clinging to him. "That is in the old tongue," he murmured, his voice a low vibration so close to her ear it sent a shiver down her spine. His finger, long and elegant, traced the glowing runes. "It speaks of the first tree, the source of the land's heart." He began to translate, his voice weaving a tapestry of forgotten magic and ancient kings. For a fleeting moment, he was not the cold monarch, but a scholar, a historian sharing a piece of his soul. Ilara listened, captivated, feeling a genuine spark of connection that was far more terrifying than any political threat. This fragile truce, however, did not extend beyond their private moments. In the council chambers, she was a target. Seated on a smaller yet ornate throne beside Kaelin, she endured the thinly veiled contempt of the nobles. Lord Malachor was the most cunning, his words like poisoned honey. "Your Majesty," he would say, bowing with a flourish, "it is refreshing to have a queen with such a grounded perspective on the world, so unlike the celestial lineage we are accustomed to." Each word was a subtle jab at her human origins, designed to remind everyone of her otherness, her perceived inferiority. General Theron remained a stoic wall of disapproval, his silence a condemnation louder than any insult. Ilara would grip the arms of her throne, her knuckles white, forcing herself to maintain a mask of serene indifference, while her spirit withered under their collective scorn. The true crucible came during a grand feast intended to display the king's renewed strength and unity. The great hall was a constellation of glittering jewels and cold, aristocratic faces. As Ilara took a delicate sip of wine, a noblewoman named Lady Lyra, known for her sharp tongue and allegiance to Malachor, rose from her seat. Her voice, clear as a bell, carried across the suddenly silent hall. "A toast," she announced, her smile a venomous slash of red. "To our new queen, may her fertile, human blood prove strong enough to continue a divine lineage it has no right to touch." The insult was breathtaking in its cruelty, a direct assault on her worth, her body, and her place in their world. A wave of gasps and malicious whispers followed. Humiliation, cold and absolute, washed over Ilara, pinning her to her throne. She felt the eyes of the entire court on her, feasting on her shame. Kaelan did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. He slowly placed his silver goblet on the table, the soft click echoing like a thunderclap in the cavernous hall. He rose to his full, imposing height, and a chilling wave of power radiated from him, silencing every whisper, every breath. His gaze, like chips of ice, found Lady Lyra and held her captive. "The Queen's blood," he said, his voice a low, deadly calm that promised utter ruin, "is now the blood of this kingdom. It is the blood that healed your king. To insult it is to commit treason against the throne and the very land you stand on." He paused, letting the terror sink in. "You will beg her forgiveness on your knees, now, or the only land you will know for the rest of your short life is the barren dirt inside a dungeon cell." The raw, protective fury in his voice was not for a political asset, it was for her. He escorted her from the hall, his hand a firm, possessive brand on the small of her back, leaving a court frozen in terrified silence. Back in the sanctuary of their royal chambers, the adrenaline of the confrontation left Ilara trembling. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her, publicly and irrevocably, weaving her identity into the very fabric of his kingdom. He turned to her, the fire in his eyes softening as he took in her pale, shaken face. The vast room, usually a symbol of their distance, now felt intimate, charged with the aftermath of his power. He had built a fortress around her with his rage, and inside its walls she felt a sense of safety she had never known. If you've made it this far, you're already part of this community. Subscribe so you don't miss a single story. Later that night, as she stared out at the moon-drenched palace gardens, a dangerous question took root in her heart. Was this still just a performance? The cold fury in Kaelan's eyes, the possessive warmth of his hand, the way he had spoken of her blood as the kingdom's own. It felt too real, too visceral to be part of their contract. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for years felt, for the first time, like a distant memory. She was beginning to feel something for this impossible, tormented king, a fragile tendril of hope unfurling in the barren landscape of her heart. This feeling was a profound betrayal of the walls she had built around herself, a risk far greater than facing down a scornful court. She was an outcast playing queen, and she was starting to forget it was all a lie. Kaelan stood on a balcony overlooking the sleeping encampment, the night air doing little to cool the raging storm within him. The blight pulsed under his skin, a dark counterpoint to the unfamiliar heat that had surged through him when he'd defended Ilara. He told himself it was a calculated move, a necessary display to solidify his power and protect the integrity of his strategy. But it was a lie, and he knew it. Seeing her wounded expression, the flicker of pain in her eyes under Lady Lyra's attack had ignited a primal, possessive rage he hadn't felt in centuries. This human, this complication, was burrowing under his skin, breaching defenses he thought were impenetrable. He was a king bound by duty, fighting a poison in his soul, and now he was fighting a war against his own heart. Days later, he sustained a deep gash on his arm during a grueling training session with General Theron, pushing his blighted body to its limits. He returned to their chambers, his breathing harsh, the wound bleeding sluggishly with dark, corrupted blood. Ilara saw it at once, and her healer's instincts took over, eclipsing the queen and the strategist. She ordered him to sit, her voice holding a gentle authority that he, surprisingly, obeyed. As she cleansed the wound, her small, warm hands were a stark contrast to the cold silver of his skin. She poured her raw, untamed energy into the injury, and he felt not only the flesh knitting together, but the gnawing pain of the blight momentarily receding, soothed by her touch. In that moment, she held all the power, and he was completely, terrifyingly at her mercy. The subtle shift in their dynamic did not go unnoticed. A young elven guard, moved by the queen's quiet kindness, began leaving a single, wild moon-petal flower outside her door each morning. It was a simple, innocent gesture of respect. But when Kaelin saw Ilara discover one, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips as she picked it up, something cold and sharp twisted in his gut. He didn't lash out. He simply walked past the guard later that day, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long, the pressure of his aura a silent, crushing warning. The flowers stopped appearing. He was jealous. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer about politics or survival. This was about a human woman who was rapidly becoming his entire world, a fact that could destroy them both. The court, cowed by Kaelin's display at the feast, changed its tactics. Open insults were replaced by insidious political maneuvering. Lord Malachor, ever the serpent, saw a new angle of attack. He called a special session of the council, his expression one of grave concern. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "your union with the Queen has brought a fragile stability. The people see your strength, your devotion, but whispers of succession have begun. They question the future of the throne." He let his words hang in the air, a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of their arrangement. "To truly silence our enemies and secure your reign. The court requires more than a marriage. It requires a promise, an heir." The demand fell into the silent chamber like a stone into a deep well. An heir. The word echoed in the vast space, a pronouncement that stripped away the final layer of their political charade and exposed the terrifyingly intimate truth of their bond. It was a masterful stroke by Malachor, a challenge Kaelin could not refuse without revealing the hollowness of his marriage and admitting a weakness his enemies would pounce upon. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face, her gaze flying to meet Kaelin's. His stoic mask was perfect, betraying nothing, but she saw it. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic deep within his storm-grey eyes. They were trapped. Their carefully constructed lie now demanding the one thing that could make it irrevocably and dangerously real. The silence that followed them back to the royal chambers was a tangible thing, a heavy, suffocating shroud that settled over the opulent silks and polished marble. Malachor's demand for an heir had not just sprung a political trap, it had detonated a bomb in the fragile, unspoken space between them. Ilara could feel the heat of Kaelin's presence from across the room, yet he had never seemed farther away. They were two statues, frozen by a single, impossible word. The lie they had so carefully constructed now required a truth neither of them was prepared to face. Every glance they had shared, every accidental touch, every moment of charged silence had led to this precipice. She had been playing the part of a queen, but her heart had forgotten it was a performance. And now it was breaking under the weight of a fantasy colliding with a brutal reality. Kaelin finally moved, his grace belying the violent tension coiled in his shoulders. He began to pace, a caged predator trapped not by stone walls, but by his own impossible duty. He spoke of strategy, of the political necessity of a response, his voice the cold, measured tone of a king, not a husband. "Malachor has boxed us in," he stated, his gaze fixed on the moonlit gardens beyond the balcony, refusing to look at her. "To refuse his demand is to admit our union is a sham. It would be seen as a sign of weakness, of instability. The council would fracture, and the whispers of my unfitness to rule would become a roar." His words were a shield, each one a carefully placed stone in the wall he was rebuilding between them. He was talking about his kingdom, but Ilara knew he was screaming about his heart, using the language of war to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of love. Her own control finally snapped. "Is that all I am to you?" she whispered. The words trembling with a pain so profound it felt like a physical wound, a political necessity, a womb to secure your throne. She stepped toward him, forcing him to finally turn and face her. The agony in her eyes was a mirror of the conflict in his. "Tell me this is all just a performance." His stoic facade cracked, a fissure revealing the raging inferno beneath. "What would you have me say?" he snarled, his voice raw with a desperation that clawed its way free. "That watching you smile at another man's gift felt like a blade in my gut, that the thought of this lie becoming real is the only thing that silences the poison in my veins, that I'm a dying king and you have become my only impossible hope. Dale lixi ya te enganchaste y suscríbete para más romances épicos." The confession hung in the air, a truth so dangerous it seemed to suck the very breath from the room. He took a ragged breath. The king finally giving way to the terrified man. "There is a prophecy," he admitted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The blight is not just a wound. It is a countdown. The Elven healers foretold that if it is not purged by the celestial alignment, my connection to the land will be obliterated. The power I wield will consume me, and I will become a mindless thing of destruction." He finally met her eyes, and she saw the stark terror he had been hiding. "The alignment is in less than a month, Elara. There is no more time. Malakor's demand is not a political maneuver, it is a death knell. He knows I am running out of time." The world tilted, and all the pieces of his coldness, his distance, and his sudden bursts of fury clicked into a devastatingly clear picture. He hadn't been pushing her away out of duty or disdain. He had been protecting her. He was shielding her from the monster he was terrified he would become, trying to keep her from being chained to a man who was already walking toward his own execution. The weight of his secret sacrifice crushed her, all her pain, her feelings of inadequacy, her fears of being just a pawn. They all dissolved in the face of his profound, selfless agony. "You should have told me," she choked out, tears finally tracing paths through the emotional dust. "From the beginning, we faced this together. That was our pact. This is the kind of impossible choice we love to explore with our community." His expression hardened instantly, the walls of the king slamming back into place, burying the vulnerable man she had just seen. "There is no we," he stated, his voice turning to ice, each word a deliberate strike meant to wound, to drive her away for her own safety. "There is my kingdom, and there is the role you will play to save it. Nothing more." Before the cruelty of his words could fully land, a sharp, formal knock echoed at the grand chamber doors. A royal herald entered, his face grim. "Your Majesty, the council is assembled in the great hall. Lord Malakor has requested your immediate presence. He demands a public answer regarding the matter of the royal succession." Kaelin's face was an unreadable mask as he offered Elara his arm, his touch formal and cold. "It is time." "My queen." The great hall was a theatre of vipers, and Elara and Kaelin were on the stage. Every eye in the Elven court was fixed upon them, sharp with suspicion and hungry for weakness. Lord Malakor stood before the twin thrones, his face a mask of feigned concern that did little to hide his triumphant smirk. "Your Majesties," he purred, his voice dripping with condescension, "the court awaits your answer. The kingdom requires assurance. Will you provide this land with an heir? Or is the new queen unable to fulfill her most sacred duty?" The insult was a poisoned dagger, aimed not just at her, but at Kaelin's authority. Elara felt Kaelin's arm tense beneath her hand, the cold, rigid control of a king preparing for a political chess move. She braced herself for another carefully constructed lie, another performance to save their skins, even as her heart fractured under the strain of it all. This was the end of the line, a public execution of their fragile, secret world. But Kaelin did not speak. He turned his head, his gaze finally fully meeting hers. In the stormy depths of his eyes, she saw the king recede and the man emerge, raw and tormented. He saw not a pawn or a queen, but the woman who had walked into fire for his people, who had faced down his hostile court with quiet dignity, who had touched him with hands that soothed the raging poison in his soul. The prophecy, the impending doom, the weight of his crown, it all coalesced into a single, devastating realization. Pushing her away to protect her from his fate was a lie far greater and more damaging than their marriage pact. It was a betrayal of the one true thing that had taken root in the ashes of his life. He released her arm, a small, definitive gesture that broke their public facade. The king was done playing. The man was ready to burn it all down for the truth. If you made it this far, you're already part of this community. Subscribe so you don't miss a single story. There will be no heir. Kaelin's voice, stripped of its regal artifice, rang through the stunned hall. He took a step forward, away from the throne, his eyes never leaving Ilara's. Because Lord Malachor is right. This union was founded on a lie. A collective gasp rippled through the court. Malachor's smile widened, sensing victory. It was a contract, Kaelin continued, his voice breaking with an emotion no one had ever witnessed from him. A desperate pact to save my kingdom. I offered her a title, a crown, and a cage. He turned to face the astonished council, but his words were only for her. But I was the one who was trapped, in my duty, in my pride, and in a darkness that was consuming me. This woman, Ilara, she did not just heal my body. She walked into the inferno of my soul and reminded me what it felt like to have a reason to fight. I love her, and I will not sentence the woman I love to be the mother of a dying king's child. Malachor let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. He admits it. He is weak, dying, unfit to rule, he bellowed, seizing the moment. But Kaelin raised a hand, and the dark, corrupted veins of the blight pulsed visibly beneath his skin, a horrifying spectacle of his inner decay. Yes, I am dying, he confessed, his voice regaining its power, now fueled by truth instead of authority. But what none of you understand, what our wisest healers could not foresee, is the nature of our bond. He reached for Ilara, his hand finding hers, and the contact was electric. Her magic, this raw, human power you all scorned, has been fighting this poison since the moment our souls were tethered. I pushed her away to shield her from my fate, believing my love would destroy her. His gaze burned into hers, filled with regret and adoration. I was a fool. Our love was never the threat. It is the only cure. As their fingers intertwined, a blinding, silver light erupted from their joined hands. It was not the chaotic energy of Ilara's healing, nor the controlled power of Kaelin's magic, but something new, a perfect harmony of both. The light pulsed through Kaelin's body, a cleansing fire that met the encroaching blight and annihilated it. The dark veins on his skin vanished, consumed by the pure, shimmering glow that now mirrored the faint mark on Ilara's own hand. The entire court was thrown back by the wave of raw, life-giving energy. Malachor stared, his face a mask of disbelief as his carefully laid plans crumbled into dust. Kaelin, his eyes clear and his spirit whole for the first time, pulled Ilara into his arms. He kissed her, not as a king claiming his queen, but as a man surrendering to his destiny, sealing their impossible truth before the entire world. The silverwood bloomed again, its leaves whispering their names to a kingdom reborn. In the quiet halls of the palace, a king learned the profound strength of vulnerability, and a healer, once an outcast feared for her gift, finally found her home not in a place, but in the heart of the man she had saved. This story ends, but there are many more waiting for you. Next week, a warrior queen bound by an ancient curse will face something even more dangerous. A fated love that demands she sacrifice her own soul. Like this video if this story captivated you. Subscribe for the next one. Comment which moment impacted you the most. Love is the magic that remakes the world from the ashes of our deepest fears.